everyone, and welcome to Reading University Christian Union's second week of events. It's lovely that you're here. I'm Lena. I'm in my first year studying French and English language.
And I'm Joe, a master's student studying psychology. This week's theme is belonging. And yesterday, Claire spoke in a video about what if separation wasn't our only problem. That's on our Instagram, which is at Imagine Reading University on the bottom of your screen. And it's also on the YouTube channel, which is just Ruku, R-U-C-U. So do check that out. Tonight, the topic of our talk is Imagine Never Feeling Lonely.
But before that, we're going to hear from Sky, who will share a bit of her experience with Christianity.
Hi, I'm Sky. I'm in first year studying speech and language therapy at the university. I'm 21 years old, but for 18 of those years, I found myself feeling as though something was missing from my life, but I could never quite figure out what it was. I wasn't brought up in a Christian home. I didn't really have much knowledge about any religious beliefs as such. I knew there were people out there who had faith, and I knew there were people out there who didn't. I just kind of accepted that my family weren't religious, and so therefore I wasn't, and that was just that. I never really questioned it. Growing up, I always felt different, let's say. I experienced a lot of messy circumstances, and I matured pretty quickly. There were some fairly complex and unsettling situations which caused me to be a bit insecure, quiet and reserved as a child. And started my ongoing struggle with anxiety. I worry about what others think of me. However, over the last 3 years, I've been lucky enough to find Christ, who taught me the beauty of forgiveness, to forgive myself for my own battles, be more gracious, and to forgive others for things that are in the past. That lifts a whole heap of darkness from my life. I do often still blame myself or even others for things that were in the past until I stop and remember that even though I didn't realise it at the time, I was equipped to deal with those situations. And I was never alone, which is shown in 1 Corinthians 10 verse 13, where it says, God is faithful, he will not let you be tested beyond your strength. But with the testing, he will always provide the way out so that you may be able to endure it. It wasn't actually until I met the first Christian of my age at college about 4 years ago that my curiosity surrounding any faith was provoked. I started to ask questions, and one day I was invited to a Good Friday church service. My anxiety went sky high. I didn't know what to expect. I don't really know how I got myself into that situation. But this was no accident. God had already lined up the answers to all my questions, and I just had no idea. I'd never heard any of the hymns sung or heard any of the verses read, and I only really knew one person in the entire room. But throughout the entire service, I was just hooked on the story of Jesus dying so that we could be free from sins. From then on, I started going to church more frequently, I asked more questions, and before I knew it, I joined my college's Christian Union. For a while, this new discovery of faith proved quite difficult because of the difference in belief at home. However, I've been so blessed to encounter life-changing experiences, and I've met unbelievable people. Last March, literally the Sunday before lockdown, I was lucky enough to be baptised, actually with all my family around me, which was so special. It was around that time I also regained contact with my dad after about 12 years. My life has completely changed. I'm now more confident in myself and in my faith. Times still get tough. I still do things that are wrong. I still struggle with anxiety, and I definitely will never have all the answers. But there's a line in a song that refers to God as my only firm foundation, the one who loves me more than I know, which I've come to learn is just so true. life can seem messy and unexplainable at times, but the one thing that never changes is the incomprehensible love that God has for us and his desire to guide us through these times. Learning to trust him has been and continues to be a challenge at times, but it's been so important in who I am today, and I know I can call upon him. I just want to end by encouraging everybody to continue to talk to your friends and your family about your beliefs. You never know who's next in God's plan. I certainly didn't know I was next. And if you're not sure what you believe, that's totally fine. I just encourage you to continue to be open-minded, continue to ask questions, no matter what point of life you're in. I promise, it'll be worth it.
Thank you, Sky. That was lovely to hear about how she turned to God. So if you have questions or want to learn more, we have more talks next week, along with social spaces, which we will talk about later in our notices section. And at these social spaces, you'll be able to chat to others and you'll be able to ask more questions about what all this Christianity stuff is about. So now we're going to hear from our speaker, Luke, who's going to come on.
Hello.
Hello, Luke. So can you tell us a bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do?
I can. My name's Luke. I'm from the sunny town of Bournemouth by the sea. I do loads of things. I try and have good fun with my spare time, but for my work, I work together with students at the university here.
Cool. And I see that you've got 2 surfboards in your background. Can you tell us a bit about that?
I do, yeah. They're actually not, they're not made. Basically, I hand make surfboards. We all need a hobby, don't we? And I'm sure you guys have got much more interesting hobbies than that, but that's my one. And then I get to ride them, which is even more fun.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
Before we start the talk, if you have any questions during it, please comment or post them in the Slido. So if you type sli.do.com into a browser and use the code IMAGINEURR, you should be able to post and upvote questions there. Cool. So, Luke, do you want to go ahead?
I'd love to. Do you remember summer holidays? I love summer holidays. We went on holiday to Cornwall last year. We just about managed it. And we'd had a wonderful week. The sun had been out, the surf had been up. So on the last day with our friends, we decided to go round the table. We were eating pizza. We all love pizza. And we decided to say what our best part of the holiday had been. One person said that the waves had been really good. My wife, Libby, said, I just get to spend time with my best friend. Someone mentioned food. And then we got around to Dylan, the youngest boy, just a little lad. And he said, I like it when we're all together. And we could call that a mantra for the human race, couldn't we? We like it when we're together. So loneliness becomes a real issue. We know that when we spend time alone, for the first 3 or so hours, we report that we really enjoy it. It's good to have some time to ourselves. But from 3 hours onwards, when we're alone, we increasingly report negative feelings. We start with boredom and we start to go crazy and out of our minds. But over time, we begin to reflect more darkly. And we know that it's really damaging to spend too long on our own. Eventually, we find out that there's an enormous psychological impact to being on our own. People who are lonely are much more likely to report depression and to experience mental decline and dementia later on in life. Over half the population report that they feel lonely sometimes, occasionally, or always. And of those who say occasionally and always, it's 24% of people asked. Loneliness is an enormous topic. We also know that there's a physical impact. Loneliness equates to smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of its impact on your physical health. You have a 26% increase in your chance of death through being lonely. So why do we experience loneliness? Well, for one thing, we know it happens because we don't think rationally about fear. When it comes to loneliness, our biggest insecurity is that we secretly believe we're unlovable because of what we're really like. Deep down, we harbour a fear that we'd be rejected if people truly knew who I was. And this is a real fear because society has too many conditions for friendship. We tend to see attractive people only become friends with attractive people unless they made that friendship very young in life. We find that trendy people tend to hang out with people who are also fashionable and cool. They don't hang out with people that they perceive not to be. And we know that wealthy people make friends with those in their own price bracket and tend not to venture very far away. We live in a society that clearly has too many conditions for friendship. And so at worst, we feel down and out and we suffer horrific health consequences. And at best, we still remain fearful and worried that the security we've built could be deconstructed in a moment. We have a reason for this as a human race. We do it because it's emotionally and psychologically safe to be with people that are similar to yourself. But we leave a huge chunk alone, don't we? We might think of Annie, who hasn't left her student halls in 6 weeks. Ron, who's in his class and speaks to no one at all. We might think of the student in our house who no one eats with. It's also bad for those of us who do find a group that we can be part of, because we become rooted in a need to preserve and prove ourselves and be validated in the eyes of others. We enter onto a hamster wheel of continuous performance because deep down we harbour an insecurity that we might not be good enough. That if people truly knew who we were, we would be on our own. So loneliness becomes not only an attack on our brain chemistry, but also on our physical movement, on our sense of humour, on our health, on our living situation, and above all, it becomes an attack on our identity and our worth as human beings. Our feeling that loneliness is wrong, though, should cause us to question some of our assumptions about our origins. We may argue rightly that loneliness feels wrong as a survival instinct. But if we subscribe to a form of atheism called philosophical naturalism, the idea that we're only bags of cells and plasma that have evolved over millions of years, and that we're only that, we have no reason to say that loneliness is wrong. We have no reason to say that humans have value. Sure, we might say that we have an earned value, a kind of performance-based value. We might even point to a Bill of Human Rights. But when we pause and think, that creates some problems. We know that human rights are strongest traditionally in the Western world, and that the Western world is influenced primarily in terms of its culture by Roman expansion. But human rights aren't a Roman invention. The Romans were known for slavery at a moment's notice. They were known for colosseums in which people ruthlessly fought others to the death for entertainment. And despite the claim that they were known for democracy, it was incredibly narrow and only for the most wealthy and impressive in society. So we need to look to something else that came with the Romans, and that's the Christians. Their legacy was orphanages. It was healthcare for those who had no reason to deserve it. It was education for all, irrespective of background. It was cultural, social change that mattered to the lonely and outsiders. So we need to be careful if we detach our morals from their foundations, because it can cause an inconsistency in our very sense of self. Well, perhaps you've been coming along to some of these events and you've heard people talk about Jesus. Certainly, at very least, he's an influential teacher, so I think it's worth us exploring what Jesus said on this. We know, for example, that he taught people to love their enemies, that he critiqued those around him for only loving those who loved them. He said, "What good is that to you? It makes you a hypocrite." His moral model was to love those who deeply needed it in society, to draw alongside the lonely. And not only that, but he lived it out. We read, for example, his interactions with Zacchaeus, a tax collector who would have been hated by his society, who almost certainly would have been deeply lonely, considered a Roman colluder and someone who wronged his own people. And yet when Jesus came to him, those around him expected him to condemn Zacchaeus in the strongest terms. But he said to Zacchaeus, "Climb down." He'd climbed a tree to see Jesus. "I want to come to your house today to have lunch." He treated Zacchaeus like a friend, and he did what he could to end his loneliness. We read other stories like a woman at the well in the heat of the day. In that culture at that time, to be on your own going to a well to get drink as a woman probably meant that you're a woman of disrepute. Those around Jesus would have expected him again to condemn this person. They would have felt that she had a reason to be lonely, and yet he entered into the lonely world of this woman and became her friend and helped her. One last story. You may have heard the story that Jesus tells of the Good Samaritan. It goes that a man is beaten up and left for dead by the side of the road. And two of the most moral, upstanding people in society pass him by. They leave him and they do nothing about it. Those that we would expect to draw alongside the lonely and the downtrodden. And yet he teaches that the third person, who was an enemy, who had nothing in common with the beaten man, was the one who took him onto his horse, took him to an inn and paid his rate until he healed. Jesus says that we are to be like the Good Samaritan. So Jesus has an ethical design for loneliness in our world that he tells us to follow. That gives us immense hope for a new world. It offers us a new life, a changing society. We know that he repeatedly called both those who obey his commands and the lonely his friends. He was a loneliness ender. You may feel more alone than you ever have in your life right now. You may have moved into halls and have every reason to feel that there's no one out there who loves you. Jesus said this: "There's no greater love a person can give than to lay down his life for his friends. And you," he said, "are my friends." And then he did lay down his life. That puts the need to prove ourselves or to be welcomed into select groups to one side. It means that our value can be given and not earned. It means that however lonely we are, we're loved. It means that we're proven valuable by the greatest being, and therefore we are valuable, whatever those around us might present to us. And he says that you can start that new life now. I'd love to tell you quickly about my friend Alex. Alex at his university was rejected by those at the society who should have loved him most, who had the most in common with him in the world, but because he was a bit unusual to them, because they didn't want to get alongside him, they cast him out and banned him from the society. When I met him, he was terribly lonely. Certain things about him had meant he'd been rejected by most of the university and then also by the one group that should have accepted him. When he came to the Christian Union, he said to me, "I can't believe how different these people are, and yet they're all friends with one another." And I said to him, that's because they've been shaped by Jesus' morals and his example. It's meant real change in his life. He's found a friendship group, and even when he is lonely, he knows that God is always there with him. That's what God is inviting you into today. One way that you can respond to having heard this is to test it. So here's my challenge to you. Why don't you join the CU on Saturday morning? They're hosting a morning on Zoom simply for friendship and to ask your questions if you have any. If you don't have any questions, you can just listen and interact with the CU. Why don't you put to test whether Jesus actually was serious about stopping loneliness? and see what happens. That's all from me. So I'm going to invite Joe and Lena back, and they're going to take us on to the next steps. If you have any questions, I'm really looking forward to hearing them.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that. So our first question is, can you rely entirely on the presence of a higher being to combat loneliness? Could this lead to further isolation?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I'm really glad that we're interacting on these bonus questions. Can you rely entirely on the presence of a higher being to combat loneliness? Entirely, I think no. But the important thing about Christianity is that was never its design. God doesn't ask us to isolate in a box and only have a relationship with Him. Actually, he generates the church, which is a group of people who are designed to live out his model for combating loneliness in the world. It's worth saying as well, I don't think Christians are the only people who are important in combating loneliness. But I do know that the Christians I've interacted with have made an enormous difference for me in that respect. Thanks for your question.
Cool. Our next question is, how can knowing God help with loneliness if I can't see or hear Him?
Great question, thank you. The good news is you can see and hear from Him. The easiest way to do that is to get hold of an account of His life, which you can find in any Bible, or the CU have copies. You can find it online as well. We have 4 accounts of Jesus' life in the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's another talk to explain why they're reliable. So you just have to take my word or find out for yourself. These are accounts of what happened in Jesus' life. So you can hear what he's like, and you can hear the kind of things he did, and you can find out a whole lot more about him. You can also try praying, and you don't stand to lose much by giving it a shot.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, if Jesus doesn't like loneliness, why did he often spend time alone in the Bible?
A great question. The translation of the word alone there kind of has several meanings, but in effect it means, so I should explain, the Bible that we might have today is translated from Greek in the New Testament and Hebrew in the Old. The word that sits behind kind of that is withdrawing. He withdrew. I think we all know that some time alone, perhaps what we might call solitude, is really good for us. It gives us an opportunity to reflect and slow down and process whatever's going on in our life. I think that's what Jesus was up to there. I don't think he was lonely himself.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, that was our last question. If anyone has any more questions, as Luke said, there will be a chance to discuss them on Saturday morning. So there should be a follow-up form in the comments. And if you're interested in hearing more from the CU, then do fill that in, and we can send you an email explaining the details for that. Yeah.
And also at 7:30 tonight, we have a pub quiz on Zoom. The one, I think it was last Tuesday, was pretty good. So if you fancy a cracking pub quiz, then if you message someone from the CU for the link, and I think, I'm not sure if the link is on Facebook or Instagram.
Well, I think if you DM anyone, the CU on Facebook or Instagram, then someone can send it to you.
Right. Thank you. But yeah, it'd be great to see people there. But until the pub quiz tonight, that is all we have time for. But thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank you.